So I'm here joined by David Campbell, singer, stage performer, TV host. You see him everywhere, on everything. He's quite a remarkable human, and one of the really remarkable things about him is how open he is about his experience with sobriety and how his relationship with alcohol has changed over the years. And to see someone with, so well known in Australia to be so open, it's quite refreshing and honestly pretty helpful, I think, for a lot of people to hear that from you. So thanks so much for taking the time to share that experience with our community and the wider community in Australia.
Oh, it's my pleasure, mate. It's an absolute pleasure. I feel like I stumbled into public, public sobriety. I was already sober, but it was an incident on TV where it sort of pushed me into the public notoriety. And then I felt like, well, I should probably talk about why that happened. And then it's just about, valuing the time I have and realizing I forget, you contacted me because I did a post on my 6-year anniversary of being sober, which was, I think, last Sunday. And it was quite, I put it up just as a sort of like, hey, I thought in the middle of Easter, no one's really going to take much notice. And it got such a huge, response. And not, it's the biggest response I've had on Twitter for years, and I felt really compelled that night to actually respond to people. I had a lot of stories. Like when I came out as sober, I responded to a lot of people just to make sure they knew they weren't alone. And I forget about how we, as people who are either dangerous alcoholics or on the spectrum of alcoholism, whether you're a binge drinker, whether you're a day drinker, or the levels that it comes to, I forget that we're all part of the same family, and that we forget that you need that support and you need to sort of think about other people. And I know that, sorry to overtalk right here, but I know that when I started to go sober, about the year before, I've been in therapy, and I've done therapy off and on for a couple of decades now, but I was in therapy and I was doing a lot of podcasts, and a lot of the podcasts I was listening to were people like Mark Maron. I was listening to the Nerdist at the time, so Chris Hardwick, people like that in America, and they were constantly talking about their sobriety. And I remember saying to my therapist, I think I need to go sober. I think it needs to happen. It's coming up in things that I watch or listen to all the time. And I think it's a sign that I'm over it and I want it to be over. And it happened soon after.
What was the original motivation for you to do that? When you heard these people and you thought, that's the kind of life that I want, or was it something else or a combination?
It was a lot. I drunk a lot over the years, and I know I'd taken myself to places which were either embarrassing or, reckless, or, having to apologize for behavior the night before because you'd usually, with me, said something outrageous and thought that I was the life of the party and wasn't. And so I remember doing a tour, and on that last tour I was doing, just being really, I felt my body was feeling a real sense of fatigue with it. It used to be a sense of like, the band and I would just drink and have a good time, and my wife would be there and we'd all have a great time. And then there was just a sense of like, it became a chore, like, oh, I have to drink now. And it wasn't just like, I could just have an easy drink. And I knew that if I was going to drink, it was going to be, all right, we're going to go for it. Let's go, and it was going to be a lot. And how was I going to get there quickly? How is it going to make it feel as easy as possible to get there? It was all these sort of things. And I remember feeling, even at dinner with my wife sometimes, she'd say, should we have a bottle of wine? And there was like a sense, like I said, it was like a sense of like heaviness, like I was about to lift a weight. Like I've just trained then, which is why I'm all sweaty. When you're bracing yourself to go, okay, let's go. And I thought, if that's where I'm at there, and then all these other things, these sort of, I guess, inspirations in media and people that I was listening to and were being inspired by, was sort of a touchstone for that as well. And then the instigation came, and I think I've told the story really quickly elsewhere, but my son was 3. And this is a terrible name-droppy thing to do, but Dan Aykroyd was in town promoting his fabulous vodka, the Crystal Head vodka. And he was on a show, and then, I sang with him, and he said, come and do a gig with me at the Star. And I went to the Star, and he gave us a bottle of vodka, and it was the day before I was going on a big holiday with my family, my wife and I, and my son. I now have 2 twins, but they weren't born then. And we decided, like, hey, let's crack open the bottle of the vodka and let's watch Ghostbusters in honor of Dan Aykroyd. It seemed like a fun thing to do at the time. And the odd thing was, it wasn't a big night. It was like maybe 4 or 5 drinks. And I went to bed, and I woke up the day we were supposed to fly to Broome on this holiday, which is why I know it comes up on my Facebook, the Broome holiday, so I know when the day is. And I was so sick. And I was vomiting, and I felt this real sense of shame. It was a shock that I was that sick, that my body was just rejecting it. And I felt a sense of shame, and we had to really hustle to get myself to the airport, which is a constant when you're a gigger, when you're in the industry and you have a big night, or you go to the Logies, or you go to something like that, and you're always like going to the airport hungover. So there was that sensation of shame. Mm. But it was my son, who was at the time 3, said, "Oh, Dad's not well." And a light switch went off in me, like a horror of knowing that I was brought up mainly by people who abused alcohol. You know, they were your working class people from Adelaide. They didn't have the knowledge or the education to know better. They didn't know how to climb out of that, and that was their crutch to get through what they were getting through in life. I have no judgment on how they behaved, but there were some bad decisions, some really reckless behavior, which I saw as a child, which normalized it for me. And then obviously with the patterns that my dad had set up very publicly, gave me a very unhealthy sense of that it's normal in the industry. And actually in a lot of the part of the industry, it is normalized. You know, you do a gig and they pay you with free booze. You go to an event and it's free champagne, you know, so you are rewarded by being a celebrity with free booze, basically. And sometimes a stick of chicken. But seeing his behavior, but also then seeing the widespread damage his behavior, and he's publicly admitted this and done 2 books about it, has done, and what he was hiding from by being that out there. So that all, quite frankly, leaning over a toilet bowl on a Saturday morning when I'm supposed to fly to Broome with my son saying very simple words as a 3-year-old does, horrified me. And that's when when we landed in Broome, we went to lunch. I felt much better. And I sat at lunch with my wife and I said, I'm done. And I haven't touched a drink since.
I mean, it's a remarkable story. And yeah, it is well known. And also with your father, Jimmy Barnes, who has come out and spoken about this real change. And I think I want to touch on a bit later about the relationship between celebrity, Australian drinking culture, and how we use it. But I want to go back a little bit earlier, into your childhood when that kind of level of drinking was going on around you. At the time, was it just normal, or did you look up and think, there's something a bit wrong with that? There's something different, or did it take?
There were moments of watching aunts and relatives of mine drink heavily. And it would become this huge party in the middle of a weeknight, and it was very, working class, singing along to songs, pushing the furniture inside and dancing. And those were very, very happy memories for me. It was also the 70s and 80s. So there was a lot of cigarettes and all of that was just like, and then they drove home drunk, all that stuff. My mother had a very bad car accident when I was very, very young, and was hospitalized and had her whole face reconstructed and very, very bad damage. Due to alcohol abuse. So that was one thing that was horrific as a child, but also, not that I learned that lesson then, but also it continued to be normalized. Everything was just extremely normal to get that drunk, to get that wasted. And there were I saw patterns of physical abuse. I saw patterns of definitely emotional abuse, and probably worse growing up. That were things that when you look back on it, when you are therapy, when you look back on what triggers you to do things, and what might drive you, what I call the dark room of alcohol, when you look into it, think, what am I trying to get rid of here? What am I trying to not think about? Those memories do play into it a bit. So that it's a mixture of like a those movies where people are dancing and singing around like it's a fantastic, like The Commitments, but with more louder music. And yet at the same time, there's a darkness to it because you do see glasses being broken and fights brought out. And, when Celtic people fight, it's really, well, you said that, and it just becomes accusatory and awful over nonsense. And so that was never really discussed and never really talked about. And so really, and I'm not blaming them, and I'm certainly not trying to excuse my own behavior, but ingrained bad habits that I observed, I certainly either took on or didn't quite acknowledge what I was getting myself in for.
How, even your language and how, you're kind of not putting blame on them, and like the way you talk, it's very therapy talk, isn't it? It's like you've learned to do that over time. And did it take, was there a period where you were angry and kind of resentful towards that upbringing and what you kind of came into the world, and you had to kind of reconcile that? And perhaps talk me through like the process of therapy for you.
It's been very long and very complicated, and there's been the use of antidepressants and things like that, which I really rejected early on in therapy. Like in the late 90s, I started that, and I didn't like them at all. And so I sort of would come back and forth, and I guess that, it's trying to do meditation and trying to do all those sort of things, or exercise. And then, but for me, everything was an extreme. I either did intense meditation or intense therapy, or I would binge eat, or I would binge drink. It was never anything by halves. And that does come with a level of coping with your own anxiety, which I had no idea that what I was dealing with was panic attacks a lot of the time. What I was dealing with was an extremely low sense of self-worth from my upbringing, a little bit from, and it's not his fault, but a little bit from my dad's career, and realizing that, I know I'm established now, but in my 20s and 30s, still not, you don't necessarily have a chip on your shoulder, but you have so much to prove.
Mm.
And when you have somebody in your life that is actually not just at the top of their game, but forever iconic, it's basically like, oh, this is impossible to find. This is it. But I didn't realize that at the time. And so that would be with me having an unhealthy relationship with him, being extremely close 1 minute and then not wanting to talk for 6 months another.
Mm.
And that would permeate with other relationships with other partners, relationships in my business, how I would behave with people, just a real sort of like really intense and really close. And then I can't speak to you for months. And there was no middle ground. And I didn't understand that was to do with not sorting stuff out when I was a kid, not being well therapied, the sense of being, I grew up in a very intense sort of way, not knowing who my mother was for a long time, finding that out just as my teenage years started. So a lot of harboring of a lot of resentments and bad behaviors that I was mimicking and continuing myself meant that I reckon only in the last, I would say maybe in the last 11, 12 years have I sort of had the discipline with therapy. Oh, I just got a good cup of tea. Thanks, love. The discipline with therapy to actually finally let that go. Funnily enough, my dad's book, when he wrote that, the first book, which was really a hard read for anyone who out there who's going through alcohol due to trauma or abuse through trauma or anything like that. It's an incredible read. But I actually found that when he finished that book and I read it, that killed the rest of it off for me. It was like, I was already sober by that point, but I could actually, or any relic of resentment or anything that was in the back of my head, I could go, oh, I get it. I can see where you're coming from. I understand completely. And it was the final, like, letting go of that for me. So, and I've done a lot of therapy since that.
That's a really remarkable way of seeing, how patterns are handed down and how they've almost you had no choice, like
it's intergenerational. It's intergenerational, and it's handed to you, and it's handed to you in a way. I was first drunk. I know that there's a story of me being like, as most Aussie kids, you have a few drinks at a party when you're really, really young and you collapse in a heap and everyone thinks it's funny. But I remember first really being drunk at like 13, 14, and not just with my mates, but with family members around. And so that normalcy of alcohol, like it's okay if you're under my roof sort of thing, that wasn't healthy for someone with my personality type.
Mm. It's, right now, as so many people are going through COVID and are in this sense of isolation, really, in this kind of dark, kind of withdrawn space.
Yeah.
And, historically, probably people felt it's sort of easy just to keep going and keep drinking or keep buying stuff and just keep.
Well, we can see the sales. The sales have spiked so much in alcohol.
Yeah, it's it's patterns of behavior are still there, and it sounds like that. And probably what a lot of people are looking for is ways to deal with the uncomfortable thoughts, or particularly around family. Now that we're forced into much closer proximity, there is no escape. That we're physically so much closer, and some people are finding that really helpful. And it would be great to know how you've been able to, I guess, process some of these demons with your own family, and now in isolation. What kind of strategies do you have to deal with the uncomfortable feelings should they arise?
Well, I think, we were talking about, therapy and how therapy, my words sound, and that is I found that a very important tool. And I guess talking about it publicly and having to confront it myself publicly is a really important tool for me to sort of put words onto emotions and then disassociate from that emotion. And that's, and that's why I think people go to AA. I think why having that, I know a lot of my friends are doing it online at the moment and doing it every day just to keep themselves in check, doing Zoom AA classes, because to actually keep talking about it gives you that sort of healthy emotional distance, which I think is really important. And we should also preface this by saying anyone who's watching this, I assume, is in the same boat as us. There's a lot of Aussies I know out there who can panic buy booze and have it sitting there and just have 1 or 2 wines a night, and it's fine. A lot of people out there I know as well are living with anxiety, and I think that a time like this, when the whole world seems to have stopped, and our jobs are threatened, and our security is threatened, and our well-being, and the self-esteem we put onto that is threatened. I get it. I get that people want to reach for something to take that anxiety away, because I would want to too. And I hear that, and I understand that. I think we have to be very mindful, people like, well, I'm going to say you, but us as a community, in this community, that we have to be really present in how we feel and acknowledge that. And if you can do that, hopefully those people, you're not living alone. If you're in this situation, you have family or people you can Zoom with or talk to, that you can go to the dark place with. It's been really important for me with this relationship with Lisa, to go to the dark place and to tell her why it's painful. And at first, that vulnerability didn't make me feel like a strong husband. I don't want to put any sort of patriarchal nonsense on top of what I'm saying, but you just do. You want to be that sort of, you're programmed in this stupid society to be the caregiver and to go out there and hunt and gather and come back home, and you should be strong. So to have that vulnerability and to discuss it felt really hard for me. But I also realized that my actions I was taking when I was drunk was just loudly throwing my vulnerabilities out there.
Yeah.
Just in but in the opposite way, by being loud and being brash and being out there. I looked like a dick, and I was behaving like someone who's trying to hide something, and I was. So by being quiet and discussing it, and sometimes going, I can't talk about this today, and sometimes going, and now I'm at a point with Lisa, which is great, where I can literally say, it's a bad day today. And not bad because I feel like I need a drink. I'm very lucky that I've never, because I'm so extreme, I'm very lucky that my extremities can also go, and I'm done, and so I get that from my grandmother. She had incredible strength, and my dad has that too. And so I'm very lucky that that's in me. But I do have days where I have to actually talk about, this is not a great day today, and I don't know why. I had a week, I remember a really bad week 2 years ago. And I remember Sonia Gruber having to say to me, like, what is with you this week? And I wasn't bad. I just was really vulnerable. Like, almost at the point of tears and ad breaks and couldn't talk and was and I had to sit in her dressing room nearly in tears and say, I don't know what's wrong with me. Bear with me. It will pass, but it's a bad week. And there are things that I know it's from past trauma that it's still coming out. The best thing we can do when we see the whole world anxious and we see people around and we don't know, and it's like being at the moment in, not on a regular bed, but on a water bed. And we're starting to feel seasick. And when that starts to gallop over us and the sweat start to happen and the panic starts to rise, that's when we need to control our breath and either call your friend, call your sponsor, speak to your partner, whether it's a wife, husband, whether you're in an LGBTQI relationship, reach out and speak to that person that makes you feel better. And, I have a buddy of mine who's in New York who's doing the same thing with me. And we've reconnected in this last year or so. And it's been really important for both of us. I lost a friend last year who took his own life, and he was also someone who abused a lot of things. And so it's I've realized the value of our words, of the value of connecting, the value of even writing a tweet or writing it as a Facebook post and having no fear about what comes back to you. And when people write to you, write back with an open heart saying, I hope you're okay. And that I've actually found that post I did last week, I also did it the week before just by saying, hey, how's everyone feeling? People went like, I'm not great. And I just did it, not glibly, but I did sort of go, geez, well, no one's saying how you're feeling out there. And I did it. And then I realized, I have to sit there and listen to these voices now and let them know that I hear them. Even though I don't speak to half these people on Twitter ever, but I felt the same way when I spoke about being sober again. I had an incredible person saying, I'm 6 weeks off heroin and this has happened. And I'm frightened and I'm scared. I don't know what that feels like. And they've got demons that they're talking about with that. And I had to say, it's okay. You can get through this. You're 6 weeks in. That's 5 more weeks than you were before. 4 more, you just got to go day by day. And that's the best thing I found is what we're doing right now, communicating.
That's amazing. And, probably if there's any virtue of the use of fame and celebrity and having an audience, like to spend the time doing that, I'm sure.
But you can do it on any social media as long as you've got enough people that are on your group you can speak to. Sometimes it's great. Even just, there are friends of mine who didn't realize how bad it was or how I was even sober, and they were just like, oh, we had no idea. And it was like, no, it's good just to remind people and to say, hey, this, people who had never congratulated me before, like, congratulations. I'm like, yes, I guess so. Thank you. But it's good so then they know.
I want to kind of zoom out to a more cultural level and looking at, Australia's relationship with alcohol more broadly. You kind of an iconic father who almost kind of paired with a beer glass, in the knowledge of people, and in your experience in the entertainment business, as you said, it's it's fused with drinking. What are your reflections on that? Do you see that changing? What are your kind of thoughts on that today?
I think it's still a work in progress. But I do think we're becoming more and more aware of it. I think the more we talk about abuse and domestic violence and the sort of the byproducts of heavy drinking and this drinking culture that we live in, the more we're aware of it. Even if you just go, oh, that's part of it, and just move on. You've somehow in your psyche, you've acknowledged it. It will come up and will play out again. And it's very important that we learn the patterns of how our minds work. And the more we discuss these things, the better it is. How do I think it's going, the culture? I think we will always be a culture that loves a beer. And I think that that's a great thing. I think it's part of the Anzac spirit. I think it's part of how we are and how we celebrate things. I think it's part of how we get together. And I think it's a part of mateship. And I don't see that as a negative for the majority of Australians. And I think it's really important. I think when you first go sober, it's like, unfortunately, I'm also a vegan, which my wife says makes me imminently punchable. But when you become vegan, Most people go, well, what about bacon? Well, how can you do that? And I go, well, you didn't care before when I was fat and eating, shitloads of hamburgers. So why question it now? And I think the first year of going sober is super confronting to people. And and that's why I say for the majority of Australians, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. They have a great, healthy relationship with alcohol. They can deal with it. They can put it down. They can work. They can have families or whatever. It can override your system, and it can creep into your life, and it's insidious without you knowing it. The first thing I noticed about getting sober is the advertising. It's everywhere. We advertise it everywhere, and we celebrate it always with a drink. We're always talking about a drink and celebrating with a drink. And I think what happened, why I came out, and it's no fault of this man's own, but I was on the Today Show, and Shane Warne was talking to the Australian cricket team, and it was the way it was cut together. It wasn't his fault, but he kept saying, are you thirsty tonight? You're going to be thirsty tonight. And they cut to me, and that people saying, oh, it's great, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what? I hate this. I hate the fact that our kids are looking up to it, and that their reward for being the greatest cricketers in the world is you're going to get on the piss. And that shouldn't be the reward for just being amazing. It shouldn't be the reward for anything. Not Shane's fault, not the cricketer's fault, just my emotions on that sentiment. And I think people confused that when I first said it, which is why I then qualified the statement by saying, hey guys, I've been sober for a long time now, and this is why I feel this way. It's a really, we do, and it's not only us, it's England, it's America, it's a lot of cultures do this. And we have it, I think the world now is, apart from the fact the world has literally stopped, but is changing. Prior to this, I think the world was starting to change about how we talk about these things, and how we discuss these problems, and how we discuss how we celebrate things. So people still say to me, well, if you win something, how do you feel then? How do you celebrate? I said, I celebrate by the acknowledgement of the fact that I've won something, and it was a credit to myself and the team and everybody I worked with, and we did something amazing. Why do I then have to have a layer of champagne on the top? That's enough. And I think we need to sometimes, I'm always saying we as people who have problems with it, we need to go like, no, the feelings I have are enough. I don't need to add anything on top of it. And that's the positive feelings, and that's the negative feelings. We need to own that. If I'm in a bad state, and I used to feel like sometimes I was in a bad state, like I should have a drink, that'll make me feel better. I was just looking for a sugar hit, really, to lift my spirits with spirits. And that wouldn't always work. It would sometimes make me feel worse. Or it would delay my patterns, and I would feel worse a day or two later when I was dreadfully hungover. So yeah, I feel as a culture we're slowly evolving, but I don't think it'll ever truly change. And I think that's okay. I think our culture, this little culture here, need to be aware of it, and we need to protect ourselves, because we shouldn't have to change the rest of culture for us to feel okay. We just need to deal with our problems. I wish it was different. I certainly know that what I'm trying to, and what Lisa, because Lisa's sober too, and what we're trying to put out there for our kids is to break the cycle. That was really an important thing for me, that I wanted to break the cycle of my family, break the cycle of my dad, and kind of break the cycle of this culture that you need to get pissed and fucked up with your friends to celebrate or to feel good about anything. And actually, you can just have a great time and go to bed. And that's awesome, because you'll be better the next day. And the best people in the world that do things usually are highly sober, so they can keep doing more things that they love to do.
I always thought, I haven't got any kids, but it's inspiring, the approach that you're taking. But I thought that the amount of therapy that I've done, it sounds like the amount of therapy that you've really done, the investment in that, of like actually having a therapy fund for my kids for when they get to 16. Like there's no doubt there's going to be problems, but it sounds like it's been so useful for you, whether that's through groups or face-to-face therapy. It sounds it's been like a really powerful thing.
It has. I haven't done many AA sessions. I've done a couple of AA sessions. Mine's come through my own therapy, and because it was easier for me to get there and to set that time aside, because I work so much. But Yeah, I don't know. I think, if anything, by trying to be sober, I'm trying to invest in not paying for my kids' therapy down the track, so that there's nothing that embarrassing that they like. Oh yeah, my dad was drunk. But also, hopefully, I mean, and there's no evidence that this sort of behavior that I'm putting out there that I can see, will stop my kids from drinking. And that's probably not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to let them just know that you can have a healthy relationship with something. And I think that's the more important lesson. I know there's cultures and people that say, oh, the kid has, if you drink at the table and they have a little bit of wine when they're like 12, 13, 14, they learn how to drink. And I get that. So I'm just trying to give them another way of looking at it.
What do you do halfway?
What do I do halfway?
Yeah.
Nothing. I feel like nothing in our lives is halfway. We have one great kid. Let's go for another kid. We had twins.
Yeah.
But also the one thing that all of us, I talked about my dad before and how difficult it was to sort of climb the mountain of how do I get my head above the clouds of Jimmy Barnes's fame or his iconic status was actually taking the one thing that I knew he did, which was extremely hard work. And that pattern is for anyone who's successful in any industry, was the success point that I kept coming back to. So finding a passion, loving it, and it doesn't matter the level of success that is, because if you're satisfied, that's your level of success, then you will find happiness. And letting that go and acknowledging that for me was really important. But I'm very lucky that I grew up in a time where I just experimented with a lot of stuff. I never wanted to do musicals. I always wanted to be in a rock band in high school, but a teacher put me in musicals. And then I went and did acting and then went to Broadway and did cabaret work. And it's funny, my life sort of pushed me still in arts, but in a different direction to my dad. And even though that came with me having to deal with my issues and resentments and stuff, looking back on it now, it was such an incredible gift because I was feeling my passion. I was satisfied with what I was doing. I just had to get rid of that stupid layer I had and then not punish myself for feeling that self-esteem issues. And it would be fine. But it's about tenacity and it's about hard work. And I think it's hard work staying sober. It's hard work staying vegan. It's, when I got, I don't know if you know, but I interviewed Tom Hanks's wife on my show. And then 2 days later, Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson came down with, COVID-19. So I was trapped here. My wife was out working in Melbourne and Brisbane. I was trapped here with 3 kids. I had to take them out of school and quarantine before all the quarantine happened and all the lockdowns happened. So we pre-lockdown. And I couldn't get any coffee. Now, I was, once again, extreme me, 3 double shots a day for the last few years. And so I could only get one a day and then friends couldn't bring me over anymore. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to come off coffee. This is probably a good thing. I need to have a healthy relationship with coffee. And I miss it more than booze.
Yeah.
But I've decided until we're all allowed to go out and socialize again, I'm going to have just tea and have a healthy relationship with coffee when it comes back. So it's about being really I set myself little challenges. I just finished training because I like to work out and I like to keep myself fit. I haven't been, but I should get back to meditating more. I haven't been for about a year. But I set myself challenges. I want to run the City to Surf. I run the City to Surf. I wanted to do a half marathon this year. That might be a little bit more difficult. But the big challenge I set for myself is that I wanted to be an honest husband. And I wanted to be the best father and most present father that I could be. And I couldn't do that under a cloud of alcohol.
And they're great things to be all in on.
Yeah. And that's what's so interesting about this time. There's a great podcast by Dan Harris, who's a journalist and a meditator. And he speaks to this woman, this old sort of fantastic sort of yogi-like woman. And they discuss the fact that, can you be happy in this time of COVID? Is it okay to be happy or to find glimmers of happiness? And I think there's a key in that for all of us. And there's a key in that with how we communicate. And there's a key in that with addicts. Is it okay to laugh at your own addiction? Is it okay to acknowledge that, you know, the darkness, sometimes you need to have a, you know, a gallows humor about it, you know? And I think people sometimes confuse that, but that's on them. Whatever it takes you to get through it and get you through that to the other side, whether it's a huge pandemic like this or your own addiction issue, whatever can get you through is the best thing.
Amazing. David Campbell, thank you so much for sharing that great suite of insights. Really appreciate it.
Listen, thank you for all the work you're doing. And for everyone out there, stay strong. I believe in you. You can do it if you want. Reach out to me on Twitter. I'll give you a shout out and I'll talk to you there. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.